Oh, no, no. That could never be true. Absolutely never. Not now, not ever. Impossible. Never true. And yet, it must be true. It absolutely has to be true. Positively. By the highest authority possible. It has to be true. What I've just stated is what is commonly known as an oxymoron. When you have two statements that conflict and contradict one another in the same sentence. Now, the it in this case is God's plan of redemption for all of humankind. And there are two sides on this, of course. There are those that believe that God's plan of redemption is just myth and ridiculous. Those are the ones, of course, that follow the enemy, that say, no, that could never happen. Look at all the history. It's never happened. We're waiting, and it's never come true, so it can never happen. And then there's, on the other side, the ones that say it must be true, are the ones that recognize that so much Bible prophecy has come true to the letter, absolutely perfectly, that whatever it says about the end times for the remainder of the period simply must come true. And there's good evidence that this is going to be exactly how it'll come. However, we have certain delays and certain hiccups along the way that cause us to doubt sometimes and lose heart at different times. Now, by the way, I'm Pastor Allen of Veritas Triumphant Church. This is my year-end report, which I call Where We Stand Now and What We Must Do. And once again, like I say at the beginning of every one of these now, it's been a wild year, and we are getting into stranger territory every year, and they all deserve a new approach, and we're going to take that in this broadcast. You're going to hear things that you wouldn't have heard last year or the year before, and it's all because of the tactics of the enemy that she is so successfully implementing right now. Now, speaking of which, he is taking entirely new steps in trying to do ingenious new ways to circumvent God's purpose and his will for all of mankind, as I stated earlier. This is God's plan of redemption. And we follow a schedule. We follow the guidebook, the scriptures. And we think we should be here at this point and here at that point. But then things kind of happen, and we get running in all directions, and we wonder what happened. What happened? Have the plans been postponed, canceled, whatever happened along the way? Well, October 7th of this last year is what kind of put everything into a tailspin. For one thing, the Jews were not prepared at all, and that's something they should have been doing. And there were some very troubling events that happened shortly before this horrible massacre occurred on October 7th. For one, they were turning increasingly hostile to their scriptures, to the Old Testament, toward Christians that were in the city of Jerusalem marching. They were there to support Israel, there to donate their time and their finances to the support of the Jewish state, and yet you had people spitting on them, attacking them, even those Hasidim Orthodox Jews with the long robes and the tall black hats. They were actually attacking the Christians that had come to proselytize. They've made rules and laws against proselytizing to the Jewish people. I guess it's considered harassment or like a hate crime to them almost. So you had those somewhat unprecedented experiences and events happening in Jerusalem shortly before it happened. And then at the peak of Yom Kippur, the Yom Kippur anniversary of 50 years after the original 1973 Yom Kippur War, you have the IDF completely just relaxing and not prepared for what was happening across the border in Gaza. And that was unlike them because they are very keenly aware, or they should be keenly aware, of the feast days that come along in the Jewish calendar, and or the events that are so important to them, that are so that should have warned them that a surprise attack could be happening. So they are caught absolutely with egg on their face, embarrassed to know that the Palestinians and the Muslims are far more aware of their own calendar, or far more conscious of their calendar than they were at this time. And it was an incredible embarrassment. And of course it was, as we all know, the greatest attack that had ever happened since the Holocaust. It was as if Satan had resurrected the spirit of Hitler and the SS and the Nazis in 1939, brought it all back into the current situation. And of course they slaughtered babies, mothers, parents, children everywhere. Over 40 babies beheaded, parents burned alive in front of their children, children murdered in front of their parents. It was absolute pandemonium. It was a den of demonic activity that the world hadn't seen since the Holocaust, since the early in the 1930s, the Night of Long Knives, or Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass in the Jewish communities in Germany. The world was not prepared for it. Of course, they weren't horrified by it. Of course, just as in Berlin, a very sophisticated society was, turning away, looking the other way when it came to the harassment and the brutality toward the Jews, and them being herded off and taken to concentration camps. Just as that happened, we saw the ever so sophisticated elites of Sydney, Australia, chanting "Gas the Jews, gas the Jews" on the night or the day of the slaughter. And unlike the first Holocaust, where it took a while for the deniers to come out and claim that everything was made up by the Jews to garner sympathy, it took no time at all, like wildfire, for the deniers to come out and say it was all made up by the Jews. Oh no, they didn't really kill that many people. They didn't do that. They're the ones that are committing genocide. So here we are with anti-Semitism on the rise all over the world. And Satan, in his delusions of grandeur for himself, believes that once this happened, he can kill every Jew in the world. Can you believe that? Of course, if he could, he'd run around and he'd make sure that every one of them was killed. But since he can't do that, he took his next best option, which is to take the godless and the demonic followers that he has surrounded himself with in every continent on earth, and convince them to call for the total destruction of every man, woman, and child of Jewish descent all over the world be destroyed. And he's been very, very successful, of course. And we have to look at this from two perspectives. One is, how does a Christian view anti-Semitism, and how does the non-believing secular world view anti-Semitism? Now, for the Christian, it's very easy. It should be no problem at all. We have simply taken what the Jews have discarded. We have become born-again believers in Yeshua, and we take all the benefits and all the joy and all the assurance and peace that goes with that. And so how do we look at the Jews? Well, the modern Jews, the modern secular Jews, it's kind of like you just kind of shrug your shoulders and kind of remorsefully take an attitude of pity in some ways, because they've had it, they've rejected it, we've taken it back, and God, in one incredible verse of Scripture, says that we are to actually make the Jews jealous by what we have. So it's not It's not a case of where, hitting people over the head with your belief system. It's a case of just presenting Yeshua, presenting Christ to the Jews, and offering it to the Jews, the stiff-necked, hard-hearted people, the stiff-necked, rebellious people that God called them to be, and saying, you've got to return. You can't just delete parts of the Bible you don't like. You can't cut out the 53rd chapter of Isaiah and say that it's not for Christ when it so obviously is. So those are the ways we do it. Now, for the non-believing world, here's where Christ's warning comes for everybody who wants to destroy Israel and wants to absolutely wipe that off the map. He says, he keeps track of those nations, those people that have turned against his sovereign people, the Jews. Now, because the Jews are instrumental in bringing about the culmination of human history and ushering in the new millennium. So we have to support them. Absolutely, we have to support them. And their hatred of the Jews is just their aligning with Satan, because they've rejected Christ. Remember, Christ said that he who is not with me is against me. And that includes all the non-believing world that Satan has gathered to himself now and is using as a massive army of slaughter in preparation for the reign of Antichrist, which is eventually to come about on the face of the earth. It has been slowed down in some ways, and as a believer, I thank God that it has, because I would like to live some decent years left before the rapture of the church, in order that we might win more people to the actual fact of the rapture, which is, for me and for many of us, it's not just an event in the future, it's an event that lives in us right now in this current age. It's something that we have to know is a sustaining force. You live in the concept, that you believe it in your heart, you accept it in your heart, you know that it has happened. It's already happened before it is even the actual event has happened. This is faith. This is total faith. And we are the victims at this time of many strange delays, which tell us that, a lot of things aren't going to happen that appear to be happening. You look at, for instance, the world economic situation. You look at the U.S.'s economic situation, and you realize $34 trillion in debt. And people are still talking about the stock market going up. And they're still taking a soft landing in the economy, and they don't see that their money is worthless, and they don't see that these terrible things are going to happen to the U.S. dollar, and all these things are around the bend. So they say they won't happen. And of course, the cynics, they will say, "Oh, look at these doomsdayers have been around forever. we haven't seen the crash yet." Because there's nothing tougher than the U.S. economy. We see that. We see all kinds of threatening things, terrible lawlessness and violence and terrorist threats that are brewing right here. I mean, it's as if this country is, they've jumped out of an airplane and they're headed for the ground, and they think that their parachute is open when it never came open. I mean, there's just going to be calamity. It's going to be calamitous results, and but with this endless optimism, unrealistic optimism, they go on and on and on. But the wise man, however, sees the danger and hides himself. Well, the government promises to all its citizens that you will never be punished for your lack of preparation, your lack of wisdom, and your lack of accepting and turning to God for answers. You'll never be punished for that because you'll always be bailed out. Well, this may seem true for a very long time, but believe me, we know what has to happen. We know what is happening. To a degree, we see the economic problems. We see the terror, the violence everywhere. We think that somehow we're immune, somehow we're inoculated to all this. Well, not anymore. We can't do that. We can't look at that, and we have to look at where we stand, because we find ourselves sort of in this no man's land, this quandary, kind of a state of nauseous, suspended animation while we figure out what we're going to do. And the solutions are a little different this time. There are preppers out there. There are those that want to stockpile food and do all kinds of preparation activities. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But we just have to realize where we are and what our next move shall be. And it will be, as far as I can see, a time of casting all our efforts into pure faith in God and His promises. In the book of Jeremiah, it says, I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you, plans to protect you, and prosper not meaning money, just giving you health and giving you a sound mind and sound decision-making abilities and knowing what to move and what to do. And that is provided for us right now. I'm going to provide a few answers for you right now that I think are very important in terms of Scripture. This is one verse that struck me right away when I was considering this topic. It is that all that is not of faith is sin. That's a very powerful verse in the book of Romans, Romans 14:23. Correlate that with another one from 1 Corinthians 10-13. It says, with every temptation, God will provide a way of escape in order that you may bear it. With every temptation. So, well, when we think of every temptation, of course, we think of, crime and sexual temptation and violence and anger and all kinds of the usual things. But temptation in this case is more in line with a temptation that is against faith, which is sin. So it's a temptation is to despair. Our temptation is to despair or to kind of give up, kind of drift along, sort of just accept what is and live a life that so many people in the world live, which is of quiet desperation, as a famous saying that goes. It's to despair, it's to sin against faith. I'm always struck by the story of Job and the fact that he was a victim of a conspiracy plot between Satan and God. And it is hard to believe when he was tested, had lost everything in a pile of rubble, covered in boils, and friends that were telling him he must have done something. And he didn't actually curse God to his face like his wife warned him to, but he did voice his complaints, and he came right to God and he said, he did tell him how he felt, but he didn't go over the line. He didn't blaspheme God. He didn't to that degree. And God still gave him a good shaking up and said, who is this that darkens understanding with words without knowledge? No. And he came back, and God restored him in more than he ever had before. And when he was in this state, he thought, well, this doesn't make any sense at all, and I'm never, the world is turned upside down, and he very likely would think, why shouldn't I just throw in the towel and just live for today or whatever, live till my lifespan is over? But he didn't, because God brought him back. And there are many people all through the world and all through history that have gone through this exact same thing. Of course, the Apostle Paul, he had a direct encounter with Jesus Christ, and he was the one that's also shipwrecked many times, imprisoned, and died a horrible death, and he was sitting in a jail cell singing when the earthquake came to get him out of prison. So we have to remember these examples and realize that we have to eventually come back to faith, total reliance on God, not looking at the effects, thinking only of the cause and only of the mission. And there's where our source of peace is. It's wonderful. We will have, we should not be surprised by anything that the enemy will send out to us now. There are many videos that you see this time of year. They'll say, well, it's watch out by March, or watch out by June. There's going to be, one thing or another, famine or tsunamis or food shortages everywhere throughout the country, and we found more and more. I don't criticize those people too much, because all that stuff is already baked into the pie, as it says. There's all the things they are talking about, in other words, have to happen, and that's why we say it must happen. God says it must happen, because He's taken the whole thing out of order, in the way we think of it. But just, it's all part of Satan's plan, because he looked at the Jews. He said, if I could only just kill those Jews, every single one of them, God's plan of redemption would be over. So what he did, it was interesting. Right after he talked about all this, right after all this happened, when the massacre in Gaza happened, suddenly when people were saying, well, it's going to start World War III. It's going to bring all these countries into we're going to have World War III. Well, it's not ever going to be World War III. The only thing that's going to be World War III is Armageddon. So we've got another war. We've got a bigger war coming up, and it's not part of this whole scene at all yet. It's going to involve like nations of Iran and Turkey and Russia and all that. It's called the Battle of Gog and Magog. But he's trying to kind of fast forward us all into World War III, as Satan likes to think of it, when it's really just another bump in the road, another wake-up call for Israel, and a time for to reveal all the anti-Semites and their evil plan, and to associate them with their father, who is Satan. That's where they are, and we can't deny that. Nobody in their right mind could ever look at the crimes against humanity, the sin against humanity, to see that kind of slaughter, and to blame the people that were the victims as if they were doing the same thing to the people of Gaza, the Palestinians, when it's all based on a lie, because it's all the program of the father of lies. So let's all focus on the right issues, shall we? Let's get real. Let's sins against truth are amongst the highest. All liars in the lake of fire. People that are angry, people that are forcing their will against God's will, they're all going to be revealed. They're always going to be cut down, and nothing is going to be escaped. People don't get away with anything. Let's settle that one as well. People do not get away with anything, even though it always seems that they're on the losing end. Only in the world's view. So, what else do I have to say about that? I've talked about, in the past, I've talked about previews, the previews of what's happening in the future and what's going on and everything. And there's one that I'd like to deal with right now in the book of Daniel. He is talking about the tribulation period in great detail. Daniel and the book of Revelation, of course, these are the ones that deal with this. And in Daniel's 12th chapter, and verse 17, he says, "For a times and a half, and that where the shattering of the power of the holy people comes to an end, all these things will be finished." He's talking about the holy people in the tribulation, the Jews those that have been saved out of great suffering. Okay. And he also talks about the preparation of the woman, for the woman, which is Israel, again, also going to a place in the tribulation, which is out of Jerusalem, down into the Jordan Valley, into the city of Petra, where it will find shelter from the recent attack of satanic forces. And he also states that in Daniel 7:25, discussing the saints in the tribulation, he says he will wear out the saints. Wear out the saints. Now that means that he'll just make life so miserable and so painful for them just to survive that they'll just feel like they're just exhausted. They're just at the point of collapsing from exhaustion. Now, isn't that sort of what we're experiencing prematurely now as well? I'm sure that many saints of God are feeling weak, are feeling frightened, they're feeling, like I said, despair. And that is not supposed to be. That's another thing. That's another thing he's trying to rush on the people right now. He's trying to say to all the saints, all those who are sealed by God at this point, say it's not worth it. He's not going to protect you in the end. And of course, there'll be no rapture. Excuse me. There'll be no rapture because that's a myth. There's no pre-tribulation rapture. All that's what you think God is saying. It's not. It means something. It means something else. I will protect you from the day of wrath. Who knows what that means? But it's not the rapture. That's what the enemy likes you to think. So there he is. He's saying you're going to wear out the saints, and we feel worn out. And I have learned in the last few years that we get far too wrapped up in our detailed life. That's always been the case, the bad seed choking out the good where we're in the vineyard working for the Lord. And this has always been something that's delayed and interrupted our plans. But I've decided now, another thing that all believers should do is to take up their long to-do list and cut it in half, or cut it down maybe 2/3, and just do the first things, the first and most important things, which are the work of the gospel, or the work of the kingdom. And then see how many of those other items are left. Those things will take care of themselves. So, as Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and all its righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Things, which means, I guess, material provision as well as other provisions, emotional, all those other provisions. But it also means just decluttering your house. Give away things. If that's what you want to do, absolutely. Give things away, sell things, come and follow me. That's the ought to do. Streamline your service to the Lord. And that's some very important piece of advice. That's something we should always live by. We all get caught up in the long to-do list. Let them go. Most of the items on that list will take care of themselves after you do the first. That's what it all means right there. There are many other verses that help us get through this period of strife. It says, "Do nothing in strife and vainglory." That just means do nothing in contention, dissension, anger, or vainglory. Or that vainglory is simply the pride of life, the vanity of self-recognition, pushing your ego-driven projects more than your God-given projects. And that's something that is we need to be aware of. Let's do anything you want, anything you can think to do that might help you, because some people will say, well, you got to do this. Now it's the time to take measures in this area. I say just do anything and everything you want to do that you think it makes good preparation. There's that's probably the best policy of all. If you want to plant a garden because you think there's going to be a nuclear fallout, go ahead. If you want to build a bomb shelter because you think there's going to be a nuclear bomb, go ahead. If you want to stockpile cold storage foods, it doesn't really matter if you and if you want to just go out and plaster the world with the gospel, that's a very good idea as well. That's the best thing to do, is just to keep up the missionary fervor and the missionary work and work for the Lord, everything to reach as many as you can in the last days. Do anything and everything. And also refuse, and I do mean refuse to surrender your peace to the enemy. I've been rereading the scriptures that say that we are to trample on serpents, we are to handle snakes, we are to take any measure against the enemy that we can. Why do we not get a grip on this? It's because we don't commit to it, because we don't stare it down. We don't face the enemy with the resoluteness and the unanimity that we face other issues of sin and opposition. We get distracted too easily, and we still think of him as way too powerful. We have to trample on the enemy. Refuse to surrender your peace to the enemy. Fast from despair. If you feel yourself overwhelmed from despair, get quiet and think of yourself as Peter on the Sea of Galilee, taking your footsteps out of the boat with your eyes upon Jesus, and you're going a few feet, before you sink, you're committed. I mean, you're focused completely, and you're walking on water. Think of that. Think of the faith you had when you first believed. Think of the power and the might of that conversion of yours, and how vital it was to you. Go back to the basics, as I've said in my earlier videos. Go back to strengthen everything that remains, and you will not you'll not waver in the last days. There's a very important verse that I want to cover. It is from the book of Hebrews, and where Paul says, therefore there remains a rest to the children of God. Therefore, just as God created everything in 6 days and then rested on the seventh, so there is a rest to the people of God, meaning that there's a rest from their striving and their inner battles that they have gone through to get to this point in their life. And that's where we should all be. That's where they've totally overcome disobedience, rebellion, rebellion in the form of holding on to a private vice that you just don't want to let go of, being a little dishonest with yourself, in some way hiding something, that slight inclination to be rebellious or disobedient in some way, till that is completely left you, you won't receive the rest that God gives his people. And that rest that we would live in is like a Sabbath rest, like the Sabbath rest that God took after he created all things. Now we are progressing. We are sort of cruising through the waters without the kind of opposition, the kind of struggles we've had before, personal struggles, inner struggles, and we are victorious in our walk with God in a way that is absolutely liberating and new. Now, if we stay in that consciousness, we will never, ever, we'll never be totally thrown off course again. I mean, there are times when your world is falling apart, and all the best thing you can say is, none of this lasts. I can't take any of this stuff when I go, so I am going to live in the present And nobody, even if they've had a terrible health crisis or a money crisis or something, nobody can really put eternal stock in any of that, because the only thing that lasts is eternity and God and the things that we have done for God. That's it. That's the whole conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep His commandments. This is Pastor Allen of Veritas Triumphant Church, and hope you enjoyed this broadcast. Just to let you know, please give it a like if you've enjoyed it, and subscribe. We're moving forward into this next year, not to be surprised or thrown by anything that the enemy has passed in our direction, because Isaiah said, God will, the follower of God will be in perfect peace if he keeps his mind centered on Him. We are at Veritas Triumphant Church at YouTube, veritastriumphant.com, the website, and Gordon Allen, Pastor Allen at Facebook. Please, as I say, give a thumbs up, and hope to see you soon in another broadcast. Until then, God bless you and keep the faith.